Hi. Do you like reading? Do you like books? Are you weary about the effects of global trade as a result of capitalism? Well, I have some Victorian reading for you to do. A quick warning before I get into the actual subject matter of the video. The subjects that I'm going to be talking about do have to do a lot with anti-Semitism, xenophobia, sexual harassment, and British people, so be warned. Getting into the authors and the works that I'm going to be talking about, Christina Rossetti was a British poet born in 1830. She was a middle-class Londoner who began writing in 1842 and published her first work at the age of 31 in 1826. She was named one of the most influential female writers for the time. In fact, she was even described as being the new Elizabeth Barrett Browning, in a sense. Her most famous work is arguably Goblin Market. The story begins with animal-like goblin men advertising fruits, notably fruit that does not grow in England, such as like melons, pomegranates, dates, lemons, things like that. There are two sisters, Laura and Lizzie, who are nearby and are trying to resist the goblin men's call. Lizzie runs away in an attempt to abstain from goblin fruit and makes it all the way home, so she is safe. However, Laura stays behind and is essentially trapped by the goblin men, and she essentially gives up her innocence via a lock of her hair. She cuts off part of her hair and cries a tear of pearl and gives it to them in exchange for some fruit. Afterwards, she essentially becomes obsessed with the fruit. She doesn't want to do anything else. She doesn't eat or drink anything else. She doesn't do any household chores. She is simply obsessed with getting more fruit. The curse is only broken once her sister decides to go out and get her more fruit because she is literally on the brink of death. In order to do this, she has to fight the goblin men because they don't want her to take the fruit somewhere else. They want to make sure that she eats it. So as a result of this, she is covered in fruit juices, and as it goes home and her sister licks it off of her and is therefore cured from the goblin curse. And I want to make it very clear, I know that goblins in general are very anti-Semitic in their roots, but these goblin men are not like J.K. Rowling goblin men. These are specifically animal-like goblin men. Like, there are very clear descriptions that like one of them has like the head of a dog or one of them has the head of a parrot. Like, they are not described as being like, you know, like little men with like hooked noses and like claws, and they're like super greedy. They are greedy, but more so for like innocence, and they more so prey on women rather than being like obsessed with actual currency, if that makes sense. But yes, they are very anti-Semitic in their roots. This poem, in the way that these goblin men are portrayed, are more so xenophobic. In fact, there are instances of like British Navy men after this poem was published using Goblin Market as a term to refer to like shops in foreign countries. That being said, let's move on to our next author. Charles Ludwig Dodgson, also known as Lewis Carroll, was a British author born in 1832. He began writing at a young age, and his most well-known work is obviously Alice in Wonderland. Alice in Wonderland is about a girl who falls into a rabbit hole and enters a strange new world in which she continuously eats and drinks like potions and like even rocks at one point that like have an effect on her body. She grows and shrinks as a result, and she is only saved from this world when her sister wakes her up from what apparently was a dream. Before I analyze the works that I just described, I'm going to be talking about the historical context of the Victorian period. The extensive growth of international trade in Victorian England can largely be traced back to England's imperialist actions and the East India Company. By Rossetti's point, and Carroll's point as well, England had been the world hegemonic power for some time and had occupations in countries around the world, from New Zealand to Canada. In many of these countries, people would be basically entirely controlled by the British Navy, who would either trade or just straight up steal things from people as a means of sending it back to England. This could be anything from like textiles to spices to like priceless cultural artifacts. The East India Company, generally referred to as the Company, initially took control of India in the 17th century. By the 1800s, the company had formed a monopoly over Indian goods such as tea, textiles, and spices. It wasn't until after the Indian Revolution of 1857 that the British government decided to dissolve the company and take control from there on, which resulted in Queen Victoria being crowned Empress of India in 1877. England would continue to have complete control over India until they gained their independence in 1947. Through its immense power, England managed to make its mark on international trade, and international goods became very widespread in Victorian England. So why would someone like Rossetti or Lewis Carroll become very weary of international goods and trading? Well, international trade separates consumers from the product, in a sense. Instead of, like, you know, before international trade, you could, like, go down the street and buy something from a guy, and this guy is the guy who made the product, and he is the one setting the price for the product that he made, and you are meeting this guy and actually talking to him and purchasing this item from him, right? Well, with international trade, you're buying a product from a guy who probably bought it from a guy who had to get it from this port, who got it from a factory, who exploited the labor of this guy in order to get it. And so it eventually disconnects the person from the good being sold. And this leads to a lot of things. For one thing, people started to think less about the laborers who were producing these products, and it also led to the exploitation of those laborers because no one's really thinking about them, so who's going to care enough to actually pay them a living wage? Especially considering the fact that England, again, had majority control over a lot of these areas for a very long period of time, so, like, what are they going to do? Like, just say no? They kind of can't. They have no other choice other than to work for these people for a low wage. This unknowing, both in terms of the production of these products and in the fact that they don't really know anything about these countries in general, kind of exotifies the goods that are being sold. So we see this fascination with exotic goods in Goblin Market. I already said they sell a lot of fruit that does not grow in England, like melons, dates, pomegranates, citrus fruits, things like that. The two sisters in the story try to abstain from this exotic fruit, but the temptation of the goods leads Laura to partake in the exotic fruit, and from there becomes hooked. This can be essentially tied back to Victorian consumers. You know, they see this new exotic thing, these new exotic products, and they can't help but just buy, and from there they become hooked. However, I do want to make it very clear that Rossetti is not entirely against international trade at all. Again, she was like an upper middle class woman in the Victorian era. She definitely bought products. She was just very weary of the the effects that these products would have on other people. Even in the poem, we can see that the only way that Laura becomes free from this goblin curse is to consume more fruit. So she's not saying that you should, like, entirely cut yourself off from fruit or, consumer goods in the first place. You should just be more aware of where these goods come from and what led to them getting to you. With the growth of international trade, more and more people began to take part in the consumption of products that came from other places. And this led to them essentially becoming hooked, in a sense. And we can see this with a conversation that Christina actually had with her brother Dante, who I will be making a video about later on. But in this situation, Dante is essentially telling his sister, like, why do you open your heart like a songbird only to dress yourself up like a pew opener? And he's basically saying, like, hey, why do you, like, open your heart about so many things and speak so, eloquently about these things that you're concerned about, but you don't actually, take any care when it comes to yourself? And he's also saying this as an attempt to get her to buy goods from a Oriental bazaar that had opened up down the street. That's the context behind this situation. He's basically like, hey, you should go buy some new clothes. And she's like, no, I don't want to. And he's like, why are your outfits shit? Again, this isn't to say that, like, Rossetti was, like, a based communist or anything like that. This is more so to say that she was just very weary of international goods as a whole, because she didn't know where they came from and she didn't know how they were made. So, she has a right to be hesitant when it comes to that. And with this hesitancy around international goods, she began to develop her story about goblin men and overconsumption. Because with so many people buying more and more goods that come from another place, there is this discussion of overconsuming in a sense of products. You are buying more and more, and maybe you're buying things that you don't even need, which essentially creates this almost new Victorian sense of gluttony. Now let's move on to a comparison between Goblin Market and Alice in Wonderland. Though Alice in Wonderland does not directly target consumerism in the same way that Goblin Market does, there are several elements of the story that can be related to life in the Victorian era. First, Alice is journeying through like a strange, exotic place where, like in Rossetti's Goblin Market, she is drawn to consuming food that comes from this place, and she is therefore affected by it, although in very different ways. This new world can be compared to foreign countries that England controls, not only for simple aspects such as like the hookah-smoking caterpillar, but also from how exotic this world feels in comparison to Alice's own normal Victorian England society. As Alice journeys through this world, she definitely has a very colonialist mindset about it, which is weird to say about a Victorian child, but hang in with me. She continuously eats the products of this world. She continuously consumes, she is constantly eating and growing and shrinking as a result of it. However, she is appalled by the people she finds herself around. She, they are described as being wild, crazy, awful people, or generally they can be seen as savage in a sense. See what I'm getting at, connecting the dots? From the moment that she enters Wonderland, she begins to consume various foods, including cakes, strange liquids, stones, and mushrooms that have strange effects on her body. The way that the food affects Alice's body is clearly very different from Laura's body. Alice consumes this food and she grows and shrinks as a result, whereas Laura consumes this food, but she becomes obsessed with it and she doesn't do anything else until she can get more. However, the food that Alice consumes in this story has a drastic effect on her mental health. There are several points in the story where she just can't help but sit down and cry because she doesn't know how to comprehend the effects that this food is having on her body. And much like in Goblin Market, the only way that Alice is able to be saved from this strange world and these strange foods is for her sister to essentially save her from this nightmare. In both stories, there are very clear interpretations warning Victorian readers against the dangers of gluttonous acts, though in reality, an individual obviously is not going to become, insanely, physically ill or mentally ill or, physically different as a result of eating food. However, it is important to remember what real-life effects of consumption can be. So the exploitation of labor, or just in general separating yourself from these products, which also could lead to the cheapening of products, which we are seeing today with online stores like Shein, where the products, fall apart within 2 days of wearing them, because to clarify, it's because these people are so separated from the goods, you're not in China if you're in America, so they can make their goods really shittily and then just sell it to you, and then what are you going to do? Are you going to go to China and beat them up? No, you're not. You have nothing you can do about it other than just to buy other stuff, which tends to be more expensive, which leads you to go back and buy cheaper stuff, which repeats the cycle anew. The want of consumerism is not something to be pushed down or punished. That is not what Rossetti or Lewis Carroll are trying to say in either of their stories, but it is simply something that you should be aware of and, check yourself on. The arguments made by Rossetti and others are not only applicable to the Victorian era, but also to our own. With the growth of international trade, it is pretty hard to really do anything without engaging in international commerce in some way. But it's really just important for us as the consumers to think about where our products come from and how the production of these products affects other people. This is all to say that by analyzing our own habits and discussing the effects of international trade, we can only hope to, create a better world, or at least, in some sense, warn ourselves and others about the dangers of overconsumption and exploitation of laborers. All in all, I hope this video was or at least somewhat coherent. I hope that you enjoyed it, especially, and if you have an alternative opinion or an alternative analysis of these stories, please let me know, either in the comment section or you can let me know on Twitter. Feel free to like and subscribe if you want to. Have a good day.